What's going on, you guys? Welcome to the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with Kevin Kepple. If you're looking to create more in your life, and if you want more of anything, it's not about doing more, it's about being more. So I'm excited you're here, and I'll see you guys on the inside. All right, cool. So what made you get into infrastructure? What's the what and the why behind that?
Well, Kevin, first, if we look at the word infrastructure, if we think about the word infrastructure, it conjures up different things for different people when they hear it, right? When most people hear that word, they may think of transportation or maybe even something IT related, but we're talking about business infrastructure. So just like if we look at transportation, for example, we have highways, byways, rail, ship, airplanes. There are all these different modes of communication and different ways of moving people and goods about as seamlessly as possible. Well, if we look at business infrastructure, that's when we're looking at the people, the processes, the tools and technologies that are really driving the day-to-day operations of your company and figuring out how can we link those things together so that information and work flows as seamlessly as possible.
Well, it sounds really simple, but I know simple doesn't always mean easy. And maybe we could talk a little bit about some of the big kind of common problems you see going into companies that you're really able to, everybody wants a quick win, right? Like, hey, how can you change my life yesterday? And so what's some of those frequent flyers?
What happens when most people come to us, they don't have the issue of not having enough customers. They have a very different issue, Kevin. They have too many. So they have this very fast, unmanageable growth. So, think about it. What would happen if your company, and I'm posing this question to people who are listening to us right now, what would happen if your company had a viral moment and all of a sudden you have all of this traffic going to your website? Your phone is ringing like crazy. People want to do business with you. It could be something that they saw online. It could be an interview that you did on Kevin's podcast. It could be a TV appearance that you had, but you have this viral moment. My question to you is, do you have the capacity or the bandwidth to support that kind of demand? And if the answer is no, which is what usually happens with many of the small businesses that we work with, they just don't have that bandwidth. They don't have that business infrastructure. We don't want them to run the risk of implosion because too much growth too soon can be a bad thing, believe it or not. We focus so much on companies failing because they don't have enough customers, but they can also fail if they have too many and don't have that operational or business infrastructure in place. What we tend to see, Kevin, is again, that fast, unmanageable growth. A lot of companies are audited in some way or another. They may fail an audit. A lot of times when that fast growth happens, they realize they need to add more people to their teams. What are those people going to do? How are they going to do the works? And how do they do the work in a way that is consistent with the way your company delivers its products and services? That's where processes come into play. So those are some of the key factors or triggers, I would say, that we tend to see when it comes to companies really needing this business infrastructure.
So if somebody's listening right now and they're a business owner or an executive at a company, like what kind of questions can they ask themselves to really understand that, hey, maybe I need to engage somebody like this to really help me clean things up?
Can we keep up with the demand that we have right now? Are we turning business away? That's a problem, right? Nobody wants to turn business because you're literally turning money away. That's a big question to ask yourself. Number two, does everyone, I know, Kevin, I know you know this and you've probably shared it with your own coaching clients, but are you working in the day-to-day operations? Are you working in your business or on it?
Unpack that a little bit for us.
Okay. When you're working in your business, that means you are in the trenches. You're rolling up your sleeves. You're the technician that Michael Gerber talks about in the E-Myth, right? Yeah. You're literally doing the work. And you're still trying to do the business development. You're still trying to network with other colleagues and professionals. You're still maybe helping to put out that Facebook ad, that Instagram ad. You're doing everything because you're in it. And oftentimes when you're in it, you can't see the forest for the trees. You can't think as a CEO truly should be, which is as that big picture strategic visionary thinker, because you're being the tactical technician. You're actually just doing the work. You're dotting all of the I's, you're crossing all of the T's, and you have very little time to really think about the overall vision. Where am I going with all? I just know that the business is coming in, I'm providing these goods or services, and we're just keeping it going. But what is the end game? What does the end game look like? So that's what I mean about working on versus in.
So I'm asking for a friend, but when you're stuck in the weeds, right, of the business, and
it's tough. It's tough to get out of it. And something I think, Kevin, that most people, because we hear this so often, right? The importance of working in your business and not on your business. But as you make that transition, it's not like you just flip a light switch, right? And boom, magically you're working on it and not in it. That's not how it happens. It is painful transitioning from working in it to on it, because as you make that transition, that means you have to hire more people. Whether those people are freelancers, you hire people as independent contractors, time employees, full-time employees. You now have to continue doing the work because you're still in it, but you also have to make sure that you start documenting things so that as you hire these other people, they will know what to do. You don't just hand over the keys to your castle to the first person that expresses an interest in working with you and your team. Right? You have to make sure that things are well documented. You have to make sure that people are trained, and it's taking up even more time that you already don't have a lot of. But I'll say this, if it's of any consolation, once you get on the other side of it, that's where the magic happens. That's when you really are working on it and not primarily in it.
And that's why we started businesses as CEOs and founders, so that we could, create something that's bigger than ourselves and really create a lot of value for other people, and not be frustrated by doing something we don't even have talent at. It's like, I think that's such good advice. So like when I first started my podcast years ago, like I edited and produced the first 10 because I wanted to know what to ask for, because if I didn't understand that, and gosh, it took me so long, I almost fell asleep just thinking about it. It was so boring for me. But it's just not my genius. But as soon as I outsourced that, it got so much better, so much faster. But I really knew what I was looking for, and I think that's really profound advice that you're sharing. So, what about when it comes to the metrics that you measure? And I know one of the things you talk about is metrics versus ethics. So I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Sometimes we can measure, first of all, we tend to measure what matters most to us, right? And what is measured is monitored, and you can actually make changes and adjustments based on that. There's a spectrum though, Kevin. There's some people who I call it analysis paralysis. They're measuring everything to the point where they become stuck. They're so busy collecting data on how their business is performing, whether it's financially, operationally, from a people perspective, from an IT perspective, that they lose sight of, okay, what do I actually do with this data now that I have it? I have these numbers, these metrics that I'm looking at, whether it be on a weekly, monthly, quarterly basis, but it's paralyzing me because it's so much data and I don't know what to do with it. I don't know how to use that data to empower me to make better decisions, to run my company more efficiently, more, increase productivity, things like that. There's on the other end of the spectrum, there's people who can use metrics, they can weaponize metrics. They can say, well, Kevin, unless you do this at this particular time, at this particular day, every single day, you're out of here.
Yikes.
And it can force, sometimes, the more extreme cases, unfortunately, can cause people to compromise their ethics.
Ooh,
That's what I mean by metrics versus ethics. The classic example I always like to share is the story of Elizabeth Holmes and Theranos. For those who don't know the story, just really quickly, She's a person who purported to have this device that could run up to 250 blood tests just from a simple prick of your finger. Great idea. Who wouldn't want to have that? Nobody loves giving blood or being pricked or poked, for any type of medical testing. So her device was revolutionary. The problem is it didn't work. And anyone who worked for her company, whenever they tried to raise their hand, raise a red flag, show concern, like, hey, we're measuring things, we're looking at this, and the data doesn't support what you're actually out there saying, these claims that you're making. We don't feel comfortable with this. Well, those people were met with threats. They had to sign these non-disclosure agreements. Some people were followed and stalked even after they left the company. It was crazy. So that is a very extreme case of what can happen. But I encourage those who are listening, all somewhere in the middle, a happy medium where you have enough metrics that truly tell you the overall performance of your company, and then you act accordingly. So if something is trending up when it should be trending down, what are you going to do about it? Or vice versa. Do you see patterns emerging in your data? Those are the kinds of things that will empower you to make better decisions about how to run your business more efficiently and effectively.
I was thinking about Wells Fargo too, while you were talking about Elizabeth Holmes, when they were just opening accounts for people who were deceased or whatever else they were doing because they had a quota. And I was like, man, you're not going to develop a collaborative environment for sure, because nobody feels safe. It gets very competitive and everybody's rowing in different directions. You're totally giving away your power. And
absolutely. Or think about police officers, who have to sometimes patrol the roads, and they have a certain quota they have to meet for tickets.
Sure.
Giving these traffic violation tickets, and all of a sudden you might do 52 and a 50 and you're getting stopped. It's like, wait a minute, I'm just 2 miles over the speed limit. Really? Well, it's toward the end of the quarter and I have to meet my numbers. So that's the kind of thing we're talking about.
Yeah, that's common sense can be uncommon, right? But you were talking too about the analysis paralysis or paralysis by analysis. And I think that's such an important point you were making, because decisiveness as a leader is crucial. I can make the best decision in the world, but if it's a decision that needed to be made in a couple of days and it took me 6 months, then really I'm getting outdated. And, the world continues to revolve around me, just not the way I want it to, probably, if that's the case.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm sorry.
No, keep going. I want to hear what you have to say. I know everything. I know.
I completely agree with you. Sometimes I think FOMO may creep in a little bit too, the fear of missing out. And so we want to arm ourselves with as much information as we possibly can. So where do we draw the line, especially if a decision has to be made fairly quickly? But I would say, that expression, be slow to hire, quick to fire. So I think in some instances, Kevin, it is to our advantage as business owners to take our time making certain decisions. For example, when it comes to hiring new people, because we certainly want to make sure we get that right. Because think about how painful it is when we don't get that right.
Expensive too.
It's expensive, absolutely, because you've invested all of your time. You've invested money and other resources into onboarding and training this person, only to find out maybe a couple of months in, this is not working out. But you're so desperate because you need the help and you're drowning in the work that you just, not necessarily the first person that comes along, but anyone who wants work is going to tell you the things that you want to hear, right? Sure. But we have to remove the emotion from it and really look at it logically. And so I would say that is a one time when we do want to take our time making a decision, but for certain other things, absolutely, you need to do it, and you need to do it quickly. And that's what I think gives us a competitive edge in comparison to our larger corporate counterparts. Because we're smaller and more nimble, we can be more agile. We We don't have layers of bureaucracy and management to go through to get things done. So let's use that leaner structure that we have to our advantage.
Absolutely. Yeah. And anytime you add in all those layers, it's like, well, this is just the way we do it. I'm like, okay, cool. But like we're using like 1 year of experience, and 20 years later, that's more like tenure than it is experience, because if I'm using, stuff that worked in the 90s, like that's pretty dangerous. Let's shift gears for a second. I'd love to know, what are the favorite types of people and companies that you love serving and working with?
Favorite types of people: ambitious people, tenacious people, people who absolutely just won't take no for an answer. They just keep going.
Ooh, yeah.
Despite the fact that everyone and everything is telling them to stop. They keep going anyway. And I love an underdog story. I love a good underdog story. The types of clients that we love working with, our small businesses. Because, Kevin, the reason is because when we make recommendations, they actually take us up on those recommendations. If we suggest things, they actually do it, and we get to see the results of that. Don't get me wrong. I do still work with larger corporate clients, even some government agencies. You don't see that. You don't always have the benefit of seeing your work put into action. And oftentimes and don't get me wrong, they'll pay you, and they'll pay you very well. But for me, it's much more gratifying to actually see that something that I recommended or suggested actually worked. And they've put it in place, they've implemented it, and it's yielded positive results. Whereas in the larger organizations, they may or may not ever take you up on whatever it is that you recommend.
Yeah, I know exactly what you're talking about. It's a lot of fun to mention something, and then a week later you're talking to somebody else, and they share this idea with you that maybe you had introduced, or you see them just doing it, and it's so cool. And it's not because it's my idea; it's because like that's how we create change, is by changing things appropriately, and like that's really fun to get to see the manifestations of that in a short amount of time, because we're here to help, and like. And that's the whole point. All right. I want to talk a little bit. I know you've got a really cool course that you offer people. Could you give us some of the details on that?
Sure, we are so excited because this was, taking a dose of our own medicine. How do we actually scale our operations?
Yeah.
Because for so many years, Kevin, it was primarily a consulting model, very typical. We will scope out a project, submit a proposal, then we start working with a particular client. But there's only so many of those kinds of transactions that can take place on a monthly basis. So I started thinking, how can we scale what we're doing? First, it was writing a book. This was a low cost, low risk way of getting the information of our framework for creating business infrastructure out there to the masses. But beyond that, even though the book is very detailed, like literally, this is how you do it, Kevin, we still appreciated the fact that there are still some people, even though they may read it, they still need to see it. And so the course actually gives the benefit of seeing videos of me in action using things like, I'm going to pull out here some stick figures. So using tools as simple as stick figures.
Yeah.
And index cards, and how just those two very simple, very inexpensive analog tools can help you figure out what tasks need to be performed, how those tasks are rolled up into departments. You create job descriptions. How can you create an organizational chart that shows what your company looks like today versus what you want it to look like in the future? What processes need to be documented? So again, just from those two simple things, index cards and stick figures, this course is showing you how you can go about creating that business infrastructure for your business.
That sounds amazing. And the book is Behind the Façade for you fine folks out there listening. And what a great course. So where can people go to access that and really connect with you and learn more about all your goodness? Smoothoperator.courses. Cool. What a great URL, man. That's easy to remember. Yeah, that's fun. So cool. Well, an effort to bring this thing in for a landing and get you back to taking over the world, let me ask, what does freedom mean to you?
Freedom my definition of freedom is very similar to my definition of success, and that is being able to do what you love on your own terms.
Yeah. 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 Important caveat. Yeah. Very cool. Well, I mean, doing something you love means you're aligned with God, which is the truth, and then really good things usually flow from that. So that's great advice. All right, one more question for you, and we'll get out of here. What's something I could have asked that I didn't ask that you'd love to share about?
Oh gosh, one of my mantras, which is leave it better than you found it. I'm a recovering perfectionist, Kevin.
Yeah.
So I think that kind of ties back into the point you made earlier about being too slow sometimes to make certain decisions. Sometimes that could be because we are perfectionists. And what I have had to learn over the years is being okay with leaving a situation, a client, or whatever it is, leaving something at least better than the way I found it. Even though it may not be exactly what I envisioned it would look like, is it at least better than the state or condition it was in when I originally found it?
That's such a good question, because I also have the perfectionist gene, and it's like, you know what? The goal's not perfect because nothing's perfect, right? It's just better. So what would better look like? And just being gentle with myself, because if I'm not graceful with me, then I can't be graceful with you because I can't give what I don't have. So I love that advice, man. Yeah. Oh, I mean, this was great. Thanks so much for coming on and sharing with us. I really appreciate you taking the time to do this. Yeah, well, it's my pleasure. You make it easy. So you guys, thanks for making it to the end. Y'all have such good taste in podcast. We love you. Thanks for being here, and make sure to share this out because somebody could benefit from the great message that was just thrown down here. We'll see y'all next time. Alrighty, you guys, thanks for making it through to the end of the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with us. Really grateful to have amazing listeners like you. Thank you guys again for listening. We love you, and we'll see you next time inside the Unlock Your Freedom podcast with Kevin Kepple.